All right, so let's start with a little bit of a check-in. Um, I've received one essay over the weekend, and Courtney said she started drafting it, which is good news. Other folks, could you just give me a quick check-in, quick update on how you're doing, how far you've gotten, if there's anything that's got you stuck or struggling on that essay at this point? So maybe we'll start with Xavier, then go Veronica, Quinn, Allie, and Jade. Working on it, should be done today. That's good to hear. Veronica, same, good. Quinn, will be done by the end of the day. Allie, pretty much the same as well. And Jade, still working on it. You all feel confident you'll be done by the end of today? No, but no concerns. Hey, Jade's camera turned on. Okay, well, that's really good to hear. I was wondering if I'd have to give you all a little more time, but it sounds like you're actually in a good place. Oh, and check in the chat, y'all, if you haven't. Priscilla just posted a survey. Priscilla, you want to explain what that is for them real quick? Oh, me too. Sorry.
It's the last final draw for the t-shirts.
Okay.
Just your sizes, your last pick for the picture that's gonna go on the t-shirt, and then yes, it shouldn't take that long. So whenever you guys have time, please fill it out.
Okay, I'm gonna just go.
And you too, if you guys want a t-shirt.
All right. All right. I just put it in the browser so that I'll have it later. Thanks. Okay, so that's actually really good to hear. I'm going to share my screen real quick because I was worried about you all, and so I made some modifications to the course yesterday to make it a little bit easier moving forward and make it so that you feel a little bit less, hopefully, right, bombarded with readings and work. So let me just get this shared. Okay. For whatever reason, my mouse scrolling isn't working today. Okay, so we had already gotten to about this point in our reading curriculum. I am still missing quite a few responses for chapter 8 and the inquiry 1 examples, but the ones that came in are excellent. Actually really impressed with the quality and consistency your all's writing. It strikes me as really not too distinguishable from my college students, which you should be proud of. Like, that's really good. So we had on the horizon midweek what would have been the hardest reading of the quarter, and it was broken into 2 parts where you would have been taking notes on it and then done a response as well. And so what I've done is gotten rid of the note-taking part completely and made this entirely optional so that you'll still have access to it. If you feel you have the time and capacity and want to read it and write a response, might be a little lesson in how to impress your teachers, right? And maybe there's not a point value assigned to it anymore, but certainly that'd be a way for me to be like, wow, good stuff, right? So I wanted to leave it available in any case. Now, if we're all in a good spot by the end of the day on this first draft, then we should be able to stick firm on the draft 2 deadline, but I'll work with you depending on what shape they look like they're in when they come in tonight. And again, even today, if you feel like you get stuck at any point, please reach out to me. Now we were going to read, oops, this got a little out of order, sorry. There we go. So we were going to read this one, Letter to Everyone Who Thinks Feminism is Synonymous with Man-Hating, for tonight. But I thought better of that because I wanted to make sure folks had the capacity to finish drafting the essay. And plus, on Wednesday, Graham and I are really trying to dedicate most of that session to making sure everybody gets like caught up. And if you're one of the very few, which there are just a handful right now, who is caught up, we can use that time to talk about revisions on your essay draft. And so I'm going to, in terms of feedback, prioritize the folks tomorrow who are already in a good place, so that they have something to work on as well. And moving forward, I was thinking like maybe it would be a good idea to sort of reserve time in that way, so that just everything gets accomplished by the time we're done here, which we only have just under 3 weeks at this point. So another thing that I've done to help consolidate time is to move these two discussions, which you'll know are worth a little bit more now than they were. And that goes with some of this other stuff too, because I diverted the points that would have been for these two assignments to other assignments. So we're going to do these 4 songs all in the same discussion rather than breaking them up across class sessions. And my thinking there is the way that it's been turning out is, it seems as though only Graham or I are really able to do a full day at a time. And so I figured, well, these won't exactly take a long time to listen to, right? In a sense, much easier than the readings we've been doing. And so there's no reason we shouldn't be able to talk about them all in an hour, in an hour and a half. And so that would be that Wednesday. And then this shorter piece, we can actually talk about at the beginning of class that Monday. And then on my end of things, that just leaves me with supporting you on your final culminating project, the poster presentation. Okay. Any questions? Does that look good to everybody? Yeah. Feels a little more manageable, perhaps. Courtney looks happy, so that's good. Okay, so we have 2 pieces to talk about today. We have Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, the White Privilege Checklist, which is a classic piece at this point. It's really well circulated, and in fact, I would say it's one of the first pieces that named white privilege as a thing. And so it's often what folks have in academia in mind when they're talking about white privilege. And later in the week, or down the line rather, I think I've got it planned, so that we'll have to take it up next week actually because of the makeup day. But we'll also be taking up the male privilege checklist, which is short enough that you won't have to read it ahead of time. And both of these pieces have been updated over the years by various people. And I actually just found out that there have been a few updates from the original author, Peggy McIntosh, on the Invisible Knapsack piece, whereas I've been using the original all these years. So that was kind of cool to see. But nonetheless, we can think about like what's still most relevant on that list, like what hasn't changed, right, in the past 30 plus years, and then what does need to be updated. So quite a few of you didn't post your response ahead of time. I think I got a total of actually only 3 responses so far on that, but it's okay because we can at least still make use of the lists, or of the list rather. So to get us started, I think I'm going to want to create a couple of breakout rooms. So let's see here. If I put, we've got 6 students total, so we could do 2 groups of 3, and then Priscilla and Elizabeth and Graham. We can kind of just like divvy up two per group, right? Who's going to be in these breakout rooms. We'll spend maybe about 15 minutes talking about these lists. And so I need you to get that open on your computer, particularly if you haven't read it ahead of time, but otherwise we're going to want that as a reference. And that is, again, on the Canvas site. It's linked on the discussion forum for that one. And if you've already done your response, you'll be a little bit ahead of the game, because what I'm going to ask you to do is in these groups agree, right, on a minimum of 5 privileges that everybody should have and 5 privileges that nobody should have. And you could even, if you get done early, go beyond that and try to go for 10 each, and that works as well. So let me create the breakout room here. Breakout rooms. 2 rooms. I'll do a manual assign. Okay, breakout room number 1. I will put Quinn and Veronica and Jade, and then maybe breakout room 2, Allie, Courtney, Xavier, and Elizabeth, Graham, Priscilla. Do you have preferences for which room I put you in?
Nope.
Nope. Okay. I will put Priscilla and Graham in this room, and in this one I'll put Elizabeth. Okay, and then open all rooms. And so again, let me just, before I do this, reiterate the instructions. You're to look through this list of white privileges and pick out 5 that you think everybody should have and 5 that you think nobody should have, and be prepared to explain the choices that your group agreed on. It would also be good if we could talk about items on the list that you feel need to be updated, right? Or things that you don't see on the list that maybe should be added to it. So maybe there's some things that no longer feel relevant. Maybe there's some other developments as well that this doesn't account for, since it is a bit older. So we will reconvene in about, oh, do I have options for how much time? Breakout rooms close automatically after, I'll give us 20 minutes. The 60-second countdown. Okay. We'll all reconvene here at 11:40 to share out what we decided on. Hello. So you have your pieces. Veronica, Quinn, Jade, do you have it open? Yes. Jade, yes. Quinn?
I'm getting it open right now.
Okay. I'll just re-download it here so I don't have to search for it. Veronica, kudos for doing this ahead of time, or rather, I should say on time. Okay.
Do you think if I just like Googled it, it would show up? Because my PC is just absolutely killing itself right now.
Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I have it open, and I'm just going to share the screen. And we can fly through this list and kind of make these determinations as we go. Does somebody want to be dedicated note keeper? All right, I'm going to have to at minimum ask that you all turn your microphones on so that we can actually talk about this. Except you, Elizabeth, because the road noise is too much. Thank you. Thank you, Veronica. Thank you, Jade. Quinn, can you turn your mic on as well? There we go. All right. I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. Something everybody should have, or something that shouldn't be on the table?
Something everybody should have. Because everyone should be able to feel like they're not alone, I guess, in that sense.
Okay, so you're saying one everybody should have?
Mm-hmm.
Veronica, is that what I'm understanding?
It's Jade.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't, it's not telling me who's talking. Sorry. Jade, so you're saying everybody should have that privilege?
Yeah.
Yeah. Be in the company of people of my race most of the time. And so maybe a thing to think about on this one is, does this imply segregation, right? Does this, I think maybe the key line is most of the time. Should we be able to self-segregate for the sake of our own comfort? Particularly, remember, this is the white privilege checklist, right? And so this is a way of saying, as a white person, I can arrange to avoid being in the company of people of color.
Talking like in general, like things that this should be shared and not just for white people. Like, I know this is a thing we can do, but it shouldn't be allowed to be just us.
So I could maybe see that in terms of like, oh, it'd be nice to be able to have the same privilege of like being in a comfort zone. But also, doesn't it seem like this shouldn't be an issue, that, you know, we'd be most comfortable around people who are only our race? And like, if all the races were doing that, wouldn't we have quite a lot less meaningful relationships, less communication across these identity lines?
Nothing is saying if we want to be. And so I think maybe the argument for, and not necessarily that I agree, but the argument for that could be, sometimes there's times where I just want to hang around chicks. I don't want to be around any guys. I want to go to a gym maybe where I only work out with women, or I'm going to go hang out with girls and I'm going to kick the men folk out of my own home. or whatever it is. There's definitely times where I just want to be around one particular group. And so maybe sometimes Black people just want to hang out with Black people and don't want to deal with white people nonsense. And should they have the privilege, if they want to have a freaking break and do that, then they should be allowed to. That would be the other, like, a privilege that everyone should have. You know, maybe Vietnamese people enjoy going to be.
You're cutting out really badly right now.
They're in the same
Okay, connection is way
as Mimi service priest. Oh, sorry, but that's my point.
Okay, it cut out for like 30, 40 seconds there, where it was just like, so I couldn't hear the end bit of that. But I do think I heard your point in the earlier bit as well, right? That like maybe folks who aren't white should also have that privilege, right, to be around people they feel safe around. And so there is a good argument both ways, it sounds like. Maybe in a perfectly ideal world where we would feel safe around people regardless of their background or identity category, this wouldn't be a productive thing. But in terms of the reality we're living with now, definitely see Elizabeth's point. So do we want to say that is a privilege everybody should have, or a privilege nobody should have, folks? Veronica, Quinn, Jade, what are we going to agree on?
I guess that everybody should have that, definitely.
Okay. Let's see how that segues into number 2. So in that one, we'll say everyone. Number 2, I can avoid spending time with people whom I was trained to mistrust and who have learned to mistrust my kind or me. Privilege everybody should have, or privilege nobody should have? I'll just start calling names. Veronica.
I think it's kind of confusing. Like the wordings of this, like the whole list for me, I was just like, I had to think about it a lot because I was like, what does this actually mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think with this one that everybody should have a choice with that, I guess. If it is a choice, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's truly not a choice, right? Which is why this finds its way on to the list. It's very close to the other one. I have a similar mindset about it insofar as like there's no way that this mistrust, right, could possibly be bridged if we persistently avoid, right, people who are different than us, or people who mistrust us, or vice versa, on one hand. So that could be counterproductive to like healing in a sense. And then on the other hand, there are those concerns, right, of safety. Should anybody be forced to spend time with people who are trained to mistrust them and who they mistrust? So who was that was speaking just now? Because the boxes aren't appearing on the screens. Was that Veronica or Jade?
That was me, Veronica.
Okay, thank you. Jade, what are your thoughts?
A little confusing to read at first, but it is something that like everyone should be able to have, because it's that feeling, it's being able to feel safe, or it's something everyone should have. There are some people that don't get to feel as safe as others.
Okay, I can buy that. I feel like both of those are bringing up a complex issue, right? And your reasoning on both of them is very valid. Number 3, if I should, so we've got now 2 that everybody should have. Maybe, do we have? Can't. Oh, there we go. If I could just get this bar to move. Oh, come on. Sorry, folks. Good old Zoom. All right, I'm just going to open this doc that I'm going to use later so that I can take notes for us. 1 equals everyone. 2 equals everyone. Okay. If I should need to move, I can be pretty sure of renting or purchasing housing in an area which I can afford and which I would want to live. I can be pretty sure that my neighbors in such a location will be neutral or pleasant to me. Is it fair to say these are ones we should definitely, that everybody should definitely have?
Yeah. It's basic ability to live, you know, like everyone should be able to have the right to have a decent home, somewhere to live, and somewhere that's not going to be problematic.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. Probably another obvious one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Grr. Just need to get that top bar out of the way. All right. I can turn on the television or front page of the front paper or the front page of the paper and see people of my race widely represented.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one. When I'm told about our national heritage or about civilization, I'm shown that people of my color made it what it is. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, because there are some people that, especially in America, that twist history to make certain people look better than others.
Mm.
And no one's represented the way they should be.
So usually, you know, this is referring to being shown that white people made it what it is, but if we extend that to everyone, then we'd be talking about, you know, a fuller purview of history.
Yeah, it would also show that white people a lot of the times were in the wrong.
Mm. Number 8, I can be sure that my children will be given curricular materials that testify to the existence of their race. I think that also sort of falls into the same category. It maybe only becomes a complicated question if we project way into the future, where perhaps we wouldn't want to affirm the existence of race per se at all. But I think in this context, like the context we're living in, that one makes good sense. I can be casual about whether or not to listen to another person's voice in a group in which she or he is the only member of his or her race. Everyone or no one?
No one, I guess.
Because that's pretty much just outright ignoring people.
Mm-hmm.
Ignore anyone, no matter race or anything.
Okay, so I'm going to say, oopsies on that one, no one. I can go into a music shop and count on finding the music of my race represent, and I think you all are right on number 11. That's really just saying I can be casual about whether or not to listen to a different perspective. I can dismiss or tune someone out. Number 12, I can go into a music shop and count on finding the music of my race represented, and to a supermarket and find the staple foods which fit my cultural traditions, to a hairdresser shop and find someone who can cut my hair. So that one seems pretty obvious that everybody should have that. Whether I use checks, credit cards, or cash, I can count on my skin color not to work against the appearance of financial reliability.
Yeah, everyone should have that. There's a lot of people that even no matter how rich you are will immediately judge because of your skin color you can't afford something.
I can arrange to protect my children most of the time from people who might not like them.
Yes. Everyone should have that.
I do not have to educate my children to be aware of systemic racism for their own daily physical protection. That also seems like one, right, that everybody should have in an ideal world. I can be pretty sure that my children's teachers and employers will tolerate them if they fit school and workplace norms. My chief worries about them do not concern others' attitudes towards their race. That also seems like one everybody should have. I can remain oblivious of the language and customs of persons of color who constitute the world's majority without feeling in my culture any penalty for such oblivion.
I feel like no one should have that ability because racism of any kind it shouldn't be tolerated, and people have let it go on for so long.
I think you're right.
I
can go ahead.
No, you go. It's good.
I'm just kind of trying to keep us moving along because the rooms will close soon. So trying to get us to have our 5 ones nobody should have. I can be pretty sure that if I ask to talk to the person in charge, I will be facing a person of my race. Everyone or no one?
That's kind of an everyone thing. Like, to not feel underrepresented in management and higher up positions.
I could definitely see that. However, would we ever want it to be a situation where we could predict who was, right, in the position just based on their race?
Yeah.
Because this is literally saying my assumption will bear out to be correct if I'm assuming that the person in charge will be a person of my race.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that an argument with a colleague of another race is more likely to jeopardize her or his chances for advancement than to jeopardize mine. What do you all think?
No one.
No one. That was, oops. That one was 28. We need one more. We have 40 seconds. If I declare there's a racial issue at hand or there isn't a racial issue at hand, my race will lend me more credibility for either position than a person of color will have. Fair to say that that's also a no one?
Yes.
Okay, so number 30. Sorry about that, y'all. The wind just blew the door closed a little too hard. Okay, so now we have some stuff to bring to the larger group, and breakout room is going to close in about 5 seconds. So I will see you all in the main room here. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, we're all back. So let's start with the group that I wasn't in. Let's have you share out the items on the list, and if I could have you read them aloud as you list the numbers, just so that we all know which ones you're referring to, because it's too many items on the list for us to have memorized, right, the numbers. So who wants to be spokesperson for breakout room 2? Oh, I will just put someone on the spot. I like
Wait,
how
we're breakout
Xavier's
room
head
too?
just goes, like, don't call me.
Yeah.
Oh.
Maybe we could do it this way. Maybe I could share the numbers, and then Xavier could read
The
them off.
reasoning. I like that. We can do the same type of thing. I'll share the numbers and read it, and then folks who were in my group can explain the reasoning we talked about. It sounds like a good setup.
Okay. Yeah, and if I have them written down here, so if we had a collected one we all agreed on, then we'll just do that in one. So let's see. Let's start with 10. This was one. We're going to start with all the ones we think everyone should have. And this is
Number 10 is I can be pretty sure of having my voice heard in a group in which I'm the only member of my race, because everyone should be heard no matter what, and they should all matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that happens a lot, actually, these days as well, right? That if you're the only person of your group, you're actually more likely to not be heard, or to be dismissed for trying to play the victim or play the race card.
Mhm. Yeah, and gets to, I think what this list also, for me, pulled out a lot is these just very bad human behaviors. So whether it's group mentality or stereotypes, that a lot of prejudice builds off of. So that's a good one. Xavier, do you want to actually, we'll just go down the list to one that Allie thought we all should have, which is 15.
15. On the next page. I do not have to educate my children to be aware of systematic racism for their own daily physical protection. And that again shows how we're all equal. There's no violence against race. There's no racism. It should just be everyone's normal. Everyone's equal. Like no living in fear.
Yeah, I mean, that one, it always brings to mind this moment I had when I was teaching 5th, 6th grade for just a handful of months. And we had like one student who, would always talk out of turn without raising his hand, young black student, right? And, who kind of just had an issue with authority, even though he was a really sweet kid. And my co-teacher at the time was an older black woman, right? And so there's this moment where she had taken him aside, and I happened to be in the room, like getting ready for the next session or something. And she said, "You need to learn how to defer to authority, or else you're not going to live a very long life, because there's currently a war going on against our young black men." The moment will never leave me, right? Because it was heartbreaking. The kid was like 12 years old. Nobody should have to hear that at that age. All right, next.
Let's see, 19. Xavier, you selected that one.
Yeah, it was, I can speak in public to a powerful male group without putting my race on trial. And that's, as we keep on going, it's freedom of speech, equal. You should be able to speak your mind without people having to judge you and put you in jail for it.
Yeah, certainly. And perhaps even like more to the point, nobody should ever be taken as representative of like their entire race, right? We definitely see the same thing play out with sexism, where if a woman is speaking to a group of powerful men, is she putting her sex on trial? Or in either case, right? And this is another item on the list. If it's a successful discourse, if they successfully persuade them, or if they successfully pitch an idea or product or whatever it is, are they going to be called a credit to their race or a credit to their gender?
Yeah. Yeah, and just, I mean, also for our own just desire to have more discourse, you know, we need people to talking, because too often people slink back and then don't get stuff out there that they need to hash out, so they're not so twisted about it. So let's see.
Put out a little bit there.
Oh, sorry. 25. You want to read that one, Xavier?
Yeah.
Or Al?
If a traffic cop pulls me over, or if the IRS audits my tax return, I can be sure I haven't been singled out because of my race. And this is quite common nowadays. People are expressing that they've been pulled over for no reason. And the riots happening in Seattle, stuff like this, everyone needs this privilege that they can't just be scared of a cop pulling them over just for driving on the road.
Yeah, the old driving while black thing, right? And is that clapping or hand up, Priscilla?
That's clapping.
Okay, clapping, gotcha.
I agree.
Yes, totally. Yeah, I totally agree with you too, Xavier. Nobody should have to feel that fear, right? Just because I'm out walking or out driving, I'm going to be harassed or made into a target. Right now, there's a lot of fear from people who are, in particular, are scared of the like resurgence of the far right, who are basically, talking about actively going out and trying to commit violence or harm. And there have been cases of people getting abducted and stuff already. So this is in addition to some of the shootings and stuff we've seen. There's this very real fear of like, if I go out and I don't have, enough buddies with me, or if I go out and I'm a woman, am I going to get like picked up off the streets and thrown into an unmarked van? And the militia members and stuff that are driving around these protests are driving vehicles that don't have license plates, y'all. And the truth of the matter is that the police aren't doing anything about it. They're just allowing it to happen. And so that also, right, functions to escalate very real fear. Elizabeth.
I'd say that group is even beyond the far right. Like, there's a meme going around that when Mitt Romney ran for president, he was like the worst thing we could possibly imagine. And now he's like the best example of the Republican Party. And it has nothing to do with him. He hasn't changed his policies. He's the same dude he was before. And so I think that saying that it's the far right or whatever, it's not necessarily, it's beyond that. It's beyond just the regular Mitt Romney Republican Party. It's something far more dangerous, far more insidious, something that people like him would be like, no, and they don't like him. They don't like Mitt Romney. So that's, I think that becomes the thing the measuring stick to look at where we're at right now, because there's definitely some people out there who, like the Proud Boys and so forth, who are far beyond any kind of conservative values of fiscal responsibility and whatnot and state rights into something much scarier.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a matter of term choice, because when I use the phrase far right, I'm basically referring to skinheads, Nazis, maybe in some cases the so-called alt-right, or really just, far right in disguise. But when I think far right, I think, fascism, essentially, as opposed to far left being something like communism. Whereas Mitt Romney, for me, might represent just conservatism or the right currently. But Elizabeth has a point in that in the United States, the right is already kind of far right. So it does sort of make for an interesting question of what verbiage to use or what terminology to use. Graham, what's the next one? Are you into the ones nobody should have now?
We still got a few more of the other ones to go. I just wanted to also say, I think that some of the behavior by police officers and by the far right are very similar in just the escalation and using that in the case of police being basically vetted by the government to do whatever you need to do to preserve what you think is right. And I think that's why we're seeing some overlap there between those two groups. So next up to, let's see, we have 26 right after 25, Xavier.
All right. Number 26 is I can easily buy posters, postcards, picture books, greeting cards, dolls, toys, and children magazines featuring people of my race. And this is kind of like, it's bringing them into normality. It's making it so everyone has their own thing. Like, you don't just want white magazines or white posters, because then where's your culture? Where's your people? So this is kind of bringing us all in, and this should be for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think about, right, how the movie Black Panther was such a big deal because it was the first time that we had, a black superhero who wasn't a walking, talking stereotype. It was the first time we had that type of representation for young kids of color. And then in response to what Graham was saying earlier, the overlap, we have cases actually, where white supremacists have infiltrated the police, right? Made that a career. They were pretty big stories when they broke. And in the past, of course, fairly palpable problems. If you haven't seen the movie Black Klansman yet, for example, really recommend it. But the longer story goes even beyond what's depicted in the movie, because they found that the Ku Klux Klan had infiltrated most of the police departments in Colorado. More locally, a pretty big story just under a couple years ago was that I call them far right, but we can squabble over terms, but the group Patriot Prayer were among, right, those sort of militia, maybe alt-right would be the right term in this case, but fascists who don't really want to claim the term fascism per se, right? Want to make it something else, even though it's sort of what it is. So they had members who posted up on top of a rooftop before a Black Lives Matter protest with high-powered rifles, And one of their members had an active warrant out for their arrest, and there were text messages between the leader of that group, Joey Gibson, and the police chief for Portland, where he was basically like Gibson was expressing his concern that one of their members had an active warrant out for their arrest, and the police chief was like, "Oh, it'll be okay, right? No big deal. He can show up," which really, showed us that they were conspiring together.
Yeah, and I think if you just look at what President Trump just did, it doesn't walk too far off that line with Roger Stone. So I think these are just things that we need to realize that as we go forward, those who make the rules benefit from them, and in the case of those who enforce the rules, can benefit other people who maybe should be held to those rules. So yeah, all very important and very hard things to see sometimes, because if you're not looking for those clear examples, which really undermine the public trust and will for us for decades. Yeah, very, very tough. So I'd like to move to Allie. Allie, do you want to tell us 27?
Sure. For 27, it's I can go home from most meetings of organizations I belong to feeling somewhat tied in, rather than isolated, out of place, outnumbered, unheard, held at a distance, or feared. Which basically goes hand in hand with number 10, which is just feeling like you're actually part of it and not, knowing that they heard you and appreciated it.
Yeah. Feeling included in the community, right? Rather than an outsider to the community. It actually takes me back to that moment from what happened when I called my black friend cis, right? When the young man comes up and has to say, "I matter." And the response that he got, if this is a white country, versus, him wanting to say, "Don't you get it? This is everybody's country, not just white people."
Yeah.
Awesome. And then let's see, why don't Allie, while I got you on the, why don't you read 41 for us?
I can be sure that if I need legal or medical help, my race will not work against me. I mean, everybody deserves it and should get the medical and legal help. That nobody should be excluded to the point where they don't.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some really horrifying stories about Black people being underserved hospitals and such like that, particularly when it comes to the mortality of mothers, right, with childbirth. And earlier, I just want to get this thought out while it's on my mind, but earlier Quinn mentioned, freedom of speech, and I had a really kind of jarring experience over the weekend. I got an email from one of my college students whose husband is active military. And y'all, I've been teaching for 12 years. I've had lots of active military students and lots of veteran students, and I've never run across anything like this. But there's currently a gag order on all active military saying that they cannot publicly say anything about Trump, anything about Black Lives Matter, the protests, or anything about George Floyd. Oh, you're muted, Courtney.
Who's George Floyd?
Oh, he's basically the main, what I'd call martyr of the Black Lives Matter movement right now. It's the one that's really, I think, gotten all this extra support. He was a man who was killed by police. And the video was particularly horrifying. Now, let me just say, there's been lots of videos, right, of people dying unjustly that are all pretty horrifying. But this one, it feels like, really has caught people's attention because the officer used his knee on top of George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And during the course of the whole thing, you know, he was saying over and over again, like, I can't breathe. And at one point, it becomes obvious that he knows he's going to die, and he like starts calling out for his dead mother and stuff. And it's such like an emotionally devastating thing to watch that it's really like gotten people behind the movement more so than a lot of these other unjust deaths. Like Tamir Rice comes to mind, 12-year-old playing with, you know about that one, Courtney? Tamir Rice. No, he was a 12-year-old in Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio. He was just in the park playing with a cap gun, and a police cruiser pulled up really fast, like into the grass in the park, and they got out and immediately shot him. And when the story broke, the defense by the police officers was that they thought he looked like he was 21. He was 12 years old. They also beat the crap out of his younger sister, right? Who went and tried to like, is my brother okay? And just saw him get shot and stuff. Beat her up and put her in the police cruiser. That case, the city did end up awarding a settlement, right? But I'm saying even a 12-year-old boy dying like that didn't catalyze the amount of support that George Floyd's death did, because there's something about that video where you just like can't help but feel a human connection when he's calling for his mother and stuff. One danger though is that people think, you know, that's all that it's about and aren't like taking into account all of these other unjust killings that have happened. I mean, most notably recently, right? Breonna Taylor, who was shot in her own home, in her own bed, because they busted the door open with a no-knock warrant. And it turned out later they had the wrong house. They weren't even in the right neighborhood. And the person that they were after was actually already in custody. And the boyfriend was imprisoned, right, because they were armed and thought somebody was breaking in. And those police officers still haven't been arrested. And so it's stuff like that, right? Stuff like when Sandra Bland, who was a Black Lives Matter activist, right, was pulled over apparently for a broken taillight, brought in, and then found hanging in her cell the next day, right? And people, or the news wrote that off as a suicide when it seemed very, very suspicious. Does that kind of answer your question? Yeah, sorry, I got a little ranty. Okay, you want to go into the ones nobody should have now, Graham?
Okay. So yeah, we'll go through. If Ali, if you don't mind staying on the line, let's do Xavier had. We'll actually yours, Ali. Let's start with number 7.
Number 7 is when I'm told about our national heritage or about civilization, I am shown that people of my color made it what it is. That could not only lead to a lot of conflict, it would lead to a lot of confusion as well, because like if you're being told that some white person did it and then a black person says that no, our people did it, then I mean, who really did it? And there's no way of knowing the truth because we were both told something different.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's lots of ways to interpret that one. Our group ended up going in the opposite direction, but I think for the same types of reasons, right? Where we wouldn't want just one race to be given the credit for the founding and building of the entire nation or civilization. But I think you're right to maybe hone in on that language, showing that people of my color made it what it is, which doesn't, it implies that it wouldn't include other colors, right? It wouldn't include other races. So I can see what you were thinking with that one for sure.
Yeah.
next on the list?
And then we have, let's see, how about number 28?
28.
I can be pretty sure that an argument with a colleague of another race is more likely to jeopardize his or her chances for advancement than to jeopardize mine.
Yeah, we also had that one. And I feel like maybe even the reasoning on that one is so obvious, we don't even need to expound on it, right?
Yeah.
All right, then let's move to 33 and 44, and that will wrap us up.
Okay.
I am not made acutely aware that my shape, bearing, or body odor will be taken as a reflection on my race. That's just, I mean, that's stereotyping people back to the original stuff. I mean,
yeah. And I think it's maybe less palpable than it was in the 80s when this was written, but it is still with us to an extent, right? And then the other one was, you said 44?
44 is our last one.
Easily find academic courses and institutions which give attention only to people of my race. So that's a pretty interesting one because it could cut both ways.
yeah.
Yeah, so I chose that one. I chose that one because I understand where, like, it's good to learn about your own race, and sometimes, you know, people don't want to share. But the problem with that is that if you don't share, how are people supposed to know how to respect culture, how to respect your race, how to respect your traditions, if you're not really talking about it, communicating? That's why I felt like that one was important, because at the end of the day, like, United States is kind of really diverse, so we can't really keep races with their own history and not be able to share among each other, because then we won't learn about each other. And then what happens? We're still in the same spot that we are kind of right now.
Only a partial view of history.
Yeah.
I like that answer. I think in our current context, some of the exceptions we'd want to watch out for, right, because we haven't got to where we need to be yet, would be courses that say focus on African American literature, or courses that are specifically about Afro studies, for example, which are trying, or we could say African studies, which are trying to provide a balance that doesn't exist currently, right? Because if we look at, like, let's go with the literature example. If we look at the canon of Western literature, it's primarily old dead white guys. And so there's a need to actually study the missing voices as well. Now, at the same time, that's very far from ideal, right? Because there's a very real sense in which African American literature could really just be called American literature, right? And be included in the same curriculum as the canonized stuff, or else, like, maybe some of the canonized stuff needs to not be in the canon if it's particularly problematic. You doing all right there, buddy? Sorry, my roommates.
Yeah, and on that note, that kind of, it reminds me of, you know, as an artist, a visual artist, there's a big, there are some artists who are Black who do not want to be parts of certain shows that are well, what the artists would call Afrocentric, or, you know, the gallery or something, so, because they just don't want to be, you know, lumped into this, what they see as yeah, divergent from what they want to be associated, which is just to be an artist, you know.
Yeah. Okay, I will fly us through the ones that we chose real quick, and let me just put this on a different page real quick. Okay, so we said number 15. Oh, we talked about that one already. Number 12, I can go into a music shop and count on finding the music of my race represented, to a supermarket and find the staple foods which fit my cultural traditions, to a hairdresser shop and find someone who can cut my hair. Maybe I could have Veronica explain that one.
So this is one that everyone should have, right? This is
Mm-hmm.
that list.
I'm doing the everyone's first.
So yeah, I mean, this one's kind of obvious. You know, you should be able to find that. You know, and it shouldn't be hidden or it shouldn't be out of view. It should be out visible. It's not hard to find, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Now I think when it comes to like music, we're in a much better place, right, than we were in the 80s. A much better place. But some of this stuff still lands, like, the fact that if you have black hair, you really are going to end up seeking out, right, a barber who specializes in that type of hair. Whereas if you go to a place like Supercuts or something, you're probably not going to get what you need. Staple foods of one's cultural traditions as well. Does it strike folks that, in the supermarket, all of the so-called ethnic food is in one aisle, and the rest of the supermarket is devoted to normal food? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Um,
Some grocery stores are a little better than others, like with what they stock, like their produce department or meat department. You can tell like neighborhoods by the grocery stores. Have you ever noticed that?
mm-hmm.
When you go like, oh, I know what kind of population's here because the produce is different or the meat is different.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. We had number 6. I can turn on the television or open the front page of the paper and see people of my race widely represented. Maybe Jade, do you want to explain that one?
Sure. Yeah, honestly, it's something that everyone should have because there's a lot of people that grow up not being represented, and it makes them feel alone, you know? Like, no one should have to feel like they're singled out all the time. Like, that no one like them can be famous. Like, no one like them can have all this popularity, like everyone they do see already.
And that's great. Maybe Quinn, you can explain. We also chose number 7 as one everybody should have. I can be sure that my children will be given curricular materials that testify to the existence of their race.
I feel like that one's just kind of really obvious. I mean, like as a white person, I've gone through, and like a lot of our history talks about, what white people have done. And I'm lucky enough that my school has also taught a lot about a lot of minority figures in America's history specifically, and in early Europe's history. But I feel like there's a lot of substance where we're just missing this whole dynamic of just entire races' histories sometimes. And I feel like it's really important that you have a history that, sort of matches your ethnicity to give you that feel of, at least, I don't know, I guess inspiration of a sort to know that someone like you has done something great.
Yeah, or I might use the word belonging, but I definitely see what you're saying. We chose number 3 as well, which I think is a pretty obvious one, although it's one that we don't talk about often enough. If I should need to move, I can be pretty sure of renting or purchasing housing in an area which I can afford and which I would want to live. So what is that one speaking to? Maybe let's go back to Veronica on this one.
What do you mean speaking to?
What problem is that pointing to?
I'm just thinking of like back in the day when they used to do like redlining or whatever. It kind of reminds me of that, but I mean, that shouldn't be a thing, obviously. There should be diversity within neighborhoods and housing and all that. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you're right. But then also in our contemporary context, it still remains the case that if you're a person of color, it's much like being a woman and going to a car dealership, right? And that you either might not get a call back or get taken seriously, or perhaps you get an inflated price or something like that that doesn't come out until down the line. So I have a friend who, when searching for a place to rent or when on the job market, changes his name on his cell phone, on his answering machine, from Carlos Morales to Charlie Knight, because it gets rid of those problems for him because he is white passing. So as Charlie Knight, he has no issues. As Carlos Morales, it's much, much more difficult. And last one we'll go with, just because I think that this was a really interesting one. I actually chose number 2. I can avoid spending time with people whom I was trained to mistrust and who have learned to mistrust my kind or me, as one everybody should have. And my impulse is usually to say that's one nobody should have, because we want to, get past issues of segregation. But I was compelled by the reasoning. Maybe Elizabeth or Jade, do you want to explain that one?
What one was it again?
Number 2, I can avoid spending time with people who I was trained to mistrust and who have learned to mistrust my kind or me.
Yeah, I mean, like we talked about in the group, it's a safety thing, everyone deserves to feel safe, and being able to be away from people that, I don't know, like, it's the, oh my god, my brain just quit. My god, where was
You said it was about being able to feel safe.
yeah, okay. I'm sorry, my brain just like quit. Yeah, like everyone should be able to feel safe in their own home and know that, or not even in their own home, but when they go out, they're not going to be in danger in any way.
I remember talking about the other one, which is I can be around people of my own race if I choose to be. Mm-hmm. And the reasoning for that was sometimes that's comforting to people. I, as a white person, don't need to be in every single space. If there is a Black student union, I don't need to go sit in the Black student union. I can allow the Black students to sit in the Black student union if that's what they choose to do, because maybe they need a break from everything that's going on. Maybe they need a chance to be around people with shared experiences and culture in a way that my presence being there would make it more about me than it is about letting people have a space for themselves. Does that make sense at all?
It does. And I liked the reasoning that both of you had on those. Now, if I was to throw a wrench into it a little bit on those two, though, I would just say I'm not sure how comfortable I would feel with white people continuing to have those two privileges, right? I'm not sure how comfortable I would feel with white people being able to have like a white student club, white student union, right, in contrast to the Black student union, or to actively avoid spending time with people of color because they were trained to mistrust them. To me, that seems that they would continue to mistrust them as a result and have their beliefs reproduced. What do you all think about that?
It reminds me a little bit of people I've known, people of color, especially Black women who've moved out of the South. And they say, well, at least back home you knew who the racists were. So if there was a white-only club, also, white is not a heritage. white isn't even really a race. White is a box that you throw everyone into. So if there was a Scandinavian club or an Irish club, there are those, and they're not seen as nearly as problematic as a white club is. Does that make sense at all, what I'm saying?
Certainly. I would just maybe add that Scandinavian and the other like categories you just listed are what we call ethnicities, right? So it's a cultural lineage or heritage. White is
Right,
definitely a race insofar as like race as category inherently umbrellas a bunch of different ethnicities into one category, right?
Well, white, yeah, and that's a different debate on, we can talk about that at another point in time. I don't want to derail your whole conversation, but if there's a Latin club and there's an Irish club, people don't, it's not as problematic, I think, because some people want to like, hey, I have Irish heritage and I want to be able to celebrate that and talk about that and learn about that with people who think that's interesting,
Yeah, certainly. And yeah, we can take up like that sort of weird overlap that occurs between ethnicity and race at a later point. Even with the term Latin, right, or Latinx, we know that accounts for a whole host of different nationalities and ethnicities. Insofar as like somebody from El Salvador doesn't have the same experiences or history as somebody from Mexico, and neither has the same as somebody from Spain, right? Okay, moving into the bad ones. We chose number 11. I can be casual about whether or not to listen to another person's voice in a group in which he or she is the only member of his or her race. Quinn, would you like to explain that one?
Basically, I feel like there's this feeling of casualness when there's only one black guy in a group, that we don't all really have to listen to him, and I feel like that's not right. I feel like definitely everyone should be listened to on an equal sense, no matter what the race is. I'm not saying don't take into acknowledgement someone's race. I'm just saying that someone's opinion does not necessarily represent their race, and so you should take it into scale, right? So you should just say, hey, I should listen to everybody because everybody has an opinion and everyone's entitled to have their opinion voiced and to have you listen to their opinion. So
yeah, absolutely. Maybe while I have you on the line, you can explain 24. I can be pretty sure that if I ask to the person in charge, I'll be facing a person of my race.
that's basically just the idea that, like, me as a white person, if I ask for a manager, I'm gonna see another white person. And while I say that's not necessarily 100% of the time true, it is a majority. And I feel like that is a bad thing, that if you can guess the person's ethnicity before you see them, usually you've got a problem, you know, unless it's like a family business and it's pretty obvious that everyone's going to be, like if I go to Walmart and ask for the manager, I can guess it's going to be a white guy because I live in Shelton and that's kind of just how it is. And I feel like it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. So I feel like you should be able just to not have to guess, or I guess if that makes sense, or like you shouldn't be able to guess their ethnicity before you even meet them.
Yeah, I'm on the same wavelength as you, for sure. And maybe we can have Veronica explain 28, and then we'll do 30. So 28, I can be pretty sure that an argument with a colleague of another race is more likely to jeopardize his chances for advancement than to jeopardize mine.
Yeah, no one should have that right at all. It's about your work ethic and how you are at the job, or like, it shouldn't be about color or race. Like, that shouldn't be a factor at all. It should be how you guys handle the situation, and whoever instigated it or starts it should be the one to go. Like,
But this is speaking right to the assumption that a person of color will be pegged as the troublemaker, regardless of how the conflict started. And then maybe while I got you on here, we can explain number 30. If I declare there is a racial issue at hand or there isn't a racial issue at hand, my race will lend me more credibility for either position than a person of color will have.
Again, like no one should have this. No, just no. It's about what your resume looks like, how qualified you are for the job, you know, not about color. Like that shouldn't even, why is that even a thing? Like, oh my God, that just irritates me so much. But yeah, like if you're qualified for the job, you're qualified for the job.
Oh, sure, but this is trying to say there's a racial issue at hand or that there's racism at hand.
And there definitely is one. Like people need to stop that. Like actually read what or listen to what they're saying instead of just saying, "Oh, he's white, he's good."
Mm-hmm. Or he's white so he can be trusted, or they're a person of color so they're just playing the race card, is sort of how that one breaks down. And then I think the last one on our list of ones nobody should have, at least what we got to with the time, was 22. I can remain oblivious to the language and customs of persons of color who constitute the world's majority without feeling in my culture any penalty for such oblivion. Maybe I could have Jade explain that one.
That's definitely one no one should have. Honestly, everyone should respect other people's cultures. I mean, if you get the chance, you should try and learn about it. I mean, everyone has different customs. It's never going to be the same for everyone. You have to learn that it's to adapt and how to help and figure out how those people live their lives and help them to figure out how you live your life and try to live as equally as you can, because you're people that have different things you grew up with. I mean, I don't know.
Oh, thank you. I just saw in the chat from Elizabeth that Breonna Taylor is being left out of the talk, but I feel like I covered that now, right, Elizabeth?
Yeah, that was from earlier.
Okay.
I posted that a while ago.
Okay, cool. I didn't even see it. I was already on the same wavelength of you. It's like, well, we should bring this one up.
But she was murdered before George Floyd was. And I do think that we kind of don't say her name as much as we should. So Breonna Taylor.
I agree. Actually, for me, it seems as though every time this happens, another case emerges within weeks, right? And then that becomes the focus of attention, and anything that's happened beforehand has a tendency to get slowly forgotten or thrown down the memory hole because it's just not getting coverage anymore. So that is a phenomena to be aware of, definitely.
Well, and I think to the point that, she was killed in a home invasion where George Floyd had, 8 minutes and 46 seconds to be documented, so that, also.
Yeah, definitely. So just a quick point about that last item on the list that we covered in terms of being oblivious to the language and customs of people of color. We might just want to, take a moment to acknowledge that it's called the lingua franca, or the language of business, right? In terms of the global market, is English. And so there's an expectation that everybody throughout the world learn English in order to be able to participate in the global economy. And yet no such expectation exists for English-speaking people to learn other languages. They're particularly not from the United States, right, where it's often resisted under the idea that if you live in America, you ought to at least be able to speak the language, right? Which is very connected to our history of things like English-only laws and stuff like that. But I've seen that it becomes controversial even, right, when Spanish is going to be like a mandatory subject in K through 12. People push back against that for reasons that don't seem to make a lot of sense. All right, I'm a little bit torn now. We've successfully gotten through one half of what I wanted to do today. We're at time. Should I?
Sorry that I made the discussions go longer. My bad.
You don't have to apologize. I'm just wondering. I feel like I could do some stuff with you if I use another half hour, but then I'm cutting into your lunch as I've been doing, right? And as Quinn said, I'm not going to go over also Amr 1246 last time.
Is there any way we can do meet for like 30 more minutes for independent learning?
That would be cool.
I mean, we do have independent learning. Don't hate me, guys, but we could use that time, and that's right after lunch.
Okay, so that would be at
1:30.
1:30.
Mm-hmm.
Can we all agree to meet back on here? No, Xavier says absolutely not. I can't.
I have business.
I have business. Sorry, that sounds so adult, right?
I know.
Business time. I feel like I only need half an hour to do it well, so maybe if I could just take the first half hour or so of Wednesday's session to take us through that chapter 8, have us talk about like ways people get off the hook. But I also feel like you need time, to make up work if you're missing work. Maybe it would make more sense to take the last half hour of Wednesday's session.
And yeah, just so you know, Amr, I'm planning to give you all Wednesday.
You're planning, well, okay. I thought we were going to do mostly like makeup work type of day that day.
Okay. That's what I meant.
Okay, cool. And so I want to make sure we devote most of that day to that, but at the same time, if we don't talk about like ways people get off the hook, I feel like we're missing a major sort of piece of the puzzle in terms of how things shake out when we try to have these discussions. So we'll take that up either at the beginning or at the end of Wednesday. I'm leaning towards the end, if only because sometimes that discussion also goes longer than I intend it to. So I fear, ending up taking the whole session or something again. But if I devote the first hour to makeup work and stuff, and then we shift gears at the end, then it should be okay. So
yeah, and I've learned I've come up with some ways to hybridize what I was going to do with Survey 123 collection that they're going to do and their introduction to Survey 123 all at once. So I feel like I've basically removed one day of work. So.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so we'll take it back up on Wednesday, and if you haven't had a chance to read Chapter 8 yet, it actually is sort of more crucial to have that under the belt than to have had McIntosh's invisible knapsack under the belt before the activity that we just did. As you were able to see, we were able to just go through that list, even for folks who hadn't read it yet. Whereas it would be much more helpful if you had sort of the definitions of each of those ways people get off the hook in mind, so that you can easily reach for some examples from your own life. And if you had some brainstorm beforehand as well, that'll also help that discussion go as smoothly as possible. So I'm not going to hold you any longer. For once, I'm going to let you go at a reasonable time, only 5 minutes late.
Can I just say something? Don't forget to finish your t-shirt link that I sent you. And then if you guys need any help with your drafts, we do have the Success Coach link. You can use that, and then we can help you guys out because we always meet at 1:30. So for any guys that want to just finish this right now at 1:30, go on our link. Cool? Cool.
All right. I'll see you all on Wednesday.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.